Good afternoon. Welcome to the regular Friday noon luncheon meeting of the City Club of Portland. I am Dick Hutchison, First Vice President and Research Board Chairman for the club. Our President, Charles Hinkle, is out of town today, could not attend. Our board host today, seated to my far left, is Marlene Bayless-Mitchell, an Information Specialist with the Portland Public Schools. Marlene. Seated next to Marlene is today's speaker, Vern Ryles, whom I will introduce shortly. Since we have just completed our membership year, we have no new members to introduce today, but we would like to remind City Club members that because a new membership year began June 1, now is an excellent time to invite friends and colleagues to join the club. Please call the club office and staff will forward membership materials to you or to the person you would like to sponsor for membership. We would always like to encourage new members to join. I'd like to make a few announcements. Next Friday, our speaker will be U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of South Africa, Edward J. Perkins. At this joint meeting with the World Affairs Council, Ambassador Perkins will discuss U.S. policy in South Africa and the Reagan administration's perspective toward the issues of divestiture and constructive engagement. That program will be here at the Westin Benson in the Mayfair Room at noon, 1 week from today. 2 weeks from today, we are pleased to have with us Ray Marshall, former Secretary of Labor and currently Professor of Economics and Public Affairs at the LBJ School of Public Affairs, University of Texas. Marshall will discuss labor and economic trends and the impact on this country's standard of living. That meeting also will be held here in the Mayfair Room at noon, 2 weeks from today. As you may have noticed, forms have been placed on the tables which provide space for written questions for our speaker. This is a fairly new procedure, seems to be working rather well at the last few programs. Staff members will circulate to gather the questions after Mr. Ryles' formal remarks. Members having written questions should hold them up so that staff members may pick them up. I will be alternating the written questions with those asked at the microphone. Now I would like to introduce today's speaker. In recent months, the City Club has focused close attention on a number of economic and social issues that not only concern society at large, but affect us individually. Speakers appearing here have spoken of the pain and waste of homelessness, the growth of an underclass in America, and the need to adapt our thinking and planning to a rapidly changing future. A recent club report pointed out that we lack a comprehensive system of justice and social services for youth, and we are warned of the growing culture of criminality afflicting an increasing number of young people. The challenge is very clear, but the question is, what can we do? And our speaker today, I believe, has part of the answer. Vern Ryles, Jr. will tell us about the Portland Investment, an innovative and exciting program that is designed to prevent school dropouts, increase youth employability, and increase access to rewarding work. Just last year, the Portland Investment enabled 2,300 teens to participate in a program of year-round schooling, job training, and part-time work. The Portland Investment is a local program that has drawn national attention as being highly effective in attacking problems of youth employability. The National Alliance of Business and the U.S. Department of Labor are watching the program closely and are urging that it be adopted as a model for communities nationwide. Vern has been deeply involved in the development of the Portland Investment as a spokesman for the Portland Leaders Roundtable, the group that formulated the plan. Ryles also has been active as past chair of the Portland Private Industry Council and was recently elected as the new chair of the combined Private Industry Council of Multnomah and Washington counties and the city of Portland. The Private Industry Council, some of you may recall, is the successor to the old CETA program, Comprehensive Employment and Training Act. He is a graduate of the University of Oregon and is president of Popper's Supply Company. He has been speaking around the country about the success of this public-private partnership in helping youth at risk. In recognition of his contributions, Ryles recently received a presidential award for his efforts in reducing youth unemployment. Today, he will tell us more about the Portland investment and challenge us to get on board to help make it work for our youth and our society. Vern Ryles.
First, let me say that I'm delighted to be here to see so many friends. And I'm particularly excited to be here to introduce you to and solicit your support and participation in this exciting program we call the Portland Investment. The Portland Investment is a long-term plan to prevent at-risk youth from failing to become productive and creative participants in our society. And the important thing about the Portland Investment, about this plan, is that it's based on one principle, a principle that for a long time has been overlooked. And that principle is that the youth in our community are our most important resource. The problem is that our youth population is in crisis. Following 3 decades of high youth unemployment, in Portland it's currently 24% for the total population, and for blacks it's 54%. Excessive dropout rates, which unfortunately now are becoming so common that peer pressure is causing good students to drop out of the system. And in Portland, our rate is 22%, and in the urban centers in the east, the rate is as high as 60%. Combine that with excessive youth crime rates, substance abuse, teenage violence and suicide, and the current trend of teenage births, which currently run 800 per year to teenage mothers in Multnomah County. We have a severe problem in our society. It's compounded by the current trend in illiteracy. We have 95,000 illiterates in Oregon. 1 out of 8 17-year-olds is functionally illiterate, and the cost of this support is overwhelming. It costs us as a country $7 billion a year to warehouse 750,000 illiterates in our federal prisons. It costs us $6.6 billion a year to provide the support for illiterate mothers on welfare. And given the conditions, I ask you, how can a free enterprise capitalistic economic system function without trained people, without human resource capital? I ask you, how can a participatory democracy survive without informed, active participants? Now, we know the conditions for this youth crisis. It's a lack of family support, and it's a continual erosion of our economic base and the expansion of our class of citizens that fall in what we call poverty. But both of those conditions are not improving. In fact, they're continuing to deteriorate. In the area of the family, children being born today, only 8% of them will be raised in a family with a father. The shift from the industrial to the post-industrial economy is causing the poverty classes in our country to expand dramatically. In Oregon, in 1978 and the years beyond, we lost 14,000 manufacturing jobs in this state that paid rates of $15 to $20. That's about $800 million in disposable income. Today, we have the jobs back, but they're all trade and service jobs at lower rates. And our standard of living in the state of Oregon, and this is also true for the Northwest, has for the first time since 1930 fallen below the national average. In addition, there's about a 10% fallout from those people who were in industrial jobs who could hide there as illiterates. And with the changes in our economy to this information age, they're unable to come back into the system after severe layoffs because they can't be trained up. And for those that are illiterate, they just completely fall out. And they fall right into the class of poverty. So what's happened in this shift since 1978? In fact, it's happening even faster. I'll go back to 1983. In 1983, 10% of our population controlled 90% of the wealth of this country. Today, 5% of the population controls 95% of the wealth. And there's about 60% of our population who has no net worth at all. To make things worse, in 1978, we had a training program in this country called the Comprehensive Education Training Act that was funded at $9 billion. Today, we have the Job Training Partnership Act, which is funded at $3 billion. That's a 70% reduction, and let me tell you, the problem has not declined. We can only deal with 3% of the problem being funded at a level of $3 billion for our country. And while we face this kind of an issue, we continue a national policy that reinforces conflict resolution through violence and diverts substantial resources away from human needs. We have to have systemic change in order to do anything about this problem. We must change our system from one of remediation to one of prevention, and to do that, we must join together to avert a social economic breakdown. Fortunately, in Portland, Oregon, there are several people with vision. And one of those people brought together a group and convened them under the label the Portland Leaders Roundtable. And that person is Roger Breesley, who is Vice Chairman of U.S. Bancorp and also chairs the Business Youth Exchange for the Chamber of Commerce. And Roger, by personal invitation, included Commissioner Margaret Strawn and School Superintendent Dr. Matthew Prophet and Mayor Bud Clark to deal with that issue. And they sat at the table and said to collaborate together with non-compatible organizations to do the kind of job that we're talking about here, to really make a difference in our society, we have to focus on one issue, and the one issue was, of course, at-risk youth. And the process was to leverage our programmatic and monetary resources. And they concluded that the organization, this Leaders Roundtable, really wasn't the important issue. It was just the catalyst to bring those resources together. So they expanded to include job training, which is why the Private Industry Council is represented, social services from the County Commission, labor, higher education, community-based organizations like the Urban League, represented by Herb Cawthorn, juvenile justices, private sector people, and of course the State Job Training Coordinating Council. There's an executive committee that functions for the Leaders Roundtable that includes the three people that I mentioned. Margaret Strawn, of course, is no longer with us, myself, and a county commissioner. We have a staff that's provided by that group and is funded by that group, And the planning staff and the implementation staff on the Portland's Leaders Roundtable is unparalleled and unmatched with both their quality, their expertise, and their diligence. They are outstanding citizens of our community, and every time I have an opportunity, I applaud them. Our first meeting of the Portland Leaders Roundtable was in the fall of 1984, and we invited Bill Spring from the well-touted Boston Compact to come and share his successes and failures with us. And out of his sharing, we developed a program with lots of strengths. It's called a comprehensive youth strategy. It's a continuum of services to youth that's focused on eliminating barriers and moving down the age list to the earliest possible time when we can reach the youth and impact them effectively. We began by leveraging our resources, and now I have to pay some fine accolades to our mayor. We had 2 youth programs, summer programs, operating in this city, one funded by the Private Industry Council and one funded out of the mayor's budget. And both of them together could provide a basis for us to leverage up substantially the number of participants. But it took some risking, because the mayor's program had always been touted and had a lot of political positives for the mayor, and it was a real difficult choice to let a popcorn salesman take over those funds. But Mayor Clark made the choice. And not only did he make the choice, when the goings were tough, he stuck it out. And this year, battling over all of the other issues that are for our community are so important, like law enforcement and fire protection and so on, the youth budget stayed at its same level. We had the same kind of commitment from Dr. Profit. He opened the schools to innovative programs. The staff of those schools were willing to participate and get behind this process, and with Margaret Strawn's ability to bring a variety of players to the table, we were able to coordinate our resources, eliminate duplication, and make this system much more effective. One of the exciting things that happened in that process is that we formed 4 planning groups, and those 4 planning groups developed the 10-year Portland investment. They were instrumental in dealing with the issues that are before us. And we will be convening those 4 work groups again this fall to evaluate our first year's performance. The other thing that happened that was very positive in this process is that the Private Industry Council has always had, as the feds would put it, a class of funding called 2A and a class of funding called 2B and 3 and so on. The 2A program has a youth and adult component, and supposedly it operates on one kind of a funding cycle, and the 2B was for summer. And of course, as a layperson, I could never understand why the youth problem wasn't a youth problem and you dealt with it 12 months a year, the same all the time. And fortunately, out of our comprehensive youth strategy, the Department of Labor has seen the wisdom of that, so now we can commingle some 2A money with 2B money, and again, that's been a real positive for us to implement this program. The result for us is an altered system that focuses on the communication and the cognitive skills that are necessary for a youth to compete in the information economy. And I want to tell you, we have some programs that we're very proud of. Incidentally, there's a packet outside that I urge you to take that delineates some of the programs in detail, and I'm sure you would enjoy reading about them. One of the programs that really exemplifies prevention is our Bridge program. The Bridge program has 25 youth in the second semester of the 8th grade. These are 13 and 14-year-olds who are at risk of dropping out of school. And in the summer, they have a basic skills component combined with work exploration. integration of pre-employment training and work focus takes place with a work experience component during the 9th and 10th grades. And we measure the success of this program upon the youth's ability to transition to structured upper division vocational programs. It really focuses on impacting barriers. And that program is our STEP program. And incidentally, for those of you who like to see good press about Oregon, the New York Times on June the 9th, this week, has an article that says, "Putting Summer to Work." And Putting Summer to Work focuses on the STEP program in Portland, Oregon. The STEP program is for youth who are academically deficient, as well as economically disadvantaged. Again, a large class of the at-risk population. The barrier issues within this program are racism, teenage pregnancy, delinquency, academic deficits, and lack of pre-employment skills. We provide services again for 14 and 15-year-olds with 110 hours of basic skills combined with 110 hours of work experience, and this is both for the summer program as well as academics during the school year. And again, the success of this program is measured by successful graduation from secondary education and increased employability. The last sample that I will identify is our partnership project, and we're really proud of that as well. This is for youth who are in the 11th and 12th grades, who have a C average and who are performing 2 levels below, 2-year levels below their rate that they should be performing at. It focuses upon their upgrading their basic skills, providing work experience before high school graduation, and increasing self-esteem. During the school season, the work experience component is combined with reading and math classes, and the summer season, pre-employment training and summer work experience. The success of this program has been 90%, and the employer commitment from the private sector has increased 50%. The program has worked so well it's been institutionalized at Grant High School, thanks to the wonderful staff at Grant, and now it's being moved and expanded to Marshall High School. It truly is a success. Now, out of all of this, we have an additional opportunity, and it doesn't have anything to do with our creativity and ability to develop it. What it relates to is the job shortage that's going to take place in the 90s. That job shortage is brought about by the demographic change that's taking place in our country. Our population is aging, and we're having less and less young people entering the workforce. For the free enterprise system, the first time in our history, we have an opportunity to educate up and prepare our underclasses like we never have been able to before. 80% of the new jobs in the year 2000 are going to be filled by women and minorities and by handicapped people, if we can get them trained up. If we don't, we will have to immigrate a workforce here to fill those needs. And the question is, can we change the system to care and prepare our youth? Can we teach our traditional morality to youth, given the family setting and the conditions of poverty? And when I say our traditional morality, I'm talking about fidelity, discipline, and responsibility. Can we demonstrate the sharing and caring side of humanity as well as the aggressive competitive side? I believe we can. Only if our community joins together in this endeavor. And there are lots of ways that it can help in the process, and I'm going to suggest some to you. For those of you that are in the private sector and business, we need unsubsidized jobs. We need you, particularly you, who are involved in manufacturing, to identify the illiterates in your workforce, and then to open special programs for literacy, either as volunteers or to plug into some of the programs that are available through the literacy hotline, the law box system, and others. And incidentally, we had a conference on literacy here in Portland just a couple of weeks ago. In fact, I believe Mr. McGraw was here and spoke at your forum. And after that conference, we had 30 companies in Oregon say, we have illiterates in our workforce and we want to help them. How can we plug in? If you're retired, volunteer your services as a tutor. People who are illiterate are intimidated easily, and people who are retired have a nice manner about them in most cases and have patience, and we find that particularly for the most severe are effective in helping them learn to read. For others, we need lots of mentors. We need lots of role models. Kids with barriers, kids with deficiencies that we're talking about don't have many role models. And I urge you, if you can, to provide some time in that role. And if you're so inclined, volunteer for one of the programs. Assist in the Child Abuse Center and the many other areas where young people have deficiencies that impact them for the rest of their life. Also in our packet, we provided a list that delineates a number of other ways that you, in fact, can participate. On behalf of the Portland Leaders Roundtable, I'm offering you the opportunity to make an investment in our youth. The monetary return is 12-to-1. Our democratic system is strengthened, and we make a significant stride in helping our youth to achieve their potential. So I'm asking you, won't you join us in the Portland investment, because together we can make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Vern. Members are reminded that staff will begin circulating now to gather written questions. Today's board host has the privilege of asking the first question. Marlene.
Thank you, Vern, for a very interesting discussion of this problem that I think we all need to become more aware of and become more involved in. My question is, I have observed over the last 20 to 25 years a variety of federal programs that have come attempting to solve the problem of employment, and specifically looking at youth employment. And what is it, what are the key elements in the Portland investment that will make it work over the long haul, with changes in leadership, changes in staff? What are the key elements here that can stay and work?
The key element is to focus on one issue, and the Portland Roundtable has done so well in that: at-risk youth. That's their concern. They've also identified the realities of this world, that federal funding is going down and the problem is increasing. And the only way that you can overcome that is have the community commit itself to a long-term effort. And that effort has to be funded internally rather than externally. Our funding is continuing to erode in the Job Training Partnership Act. In fact, for the Tri-County area, our funding is reduced about $2.7 to $3 million for the next year. With that kind of a setting, you have to collaborate. You have to bring all of the resources together without duplication and bring them to the youth deficits as early as is possible. Under the Job Training Partnership Act, the lowest funding age that we can participate in is 14 and 15-year-olds. We need to get to youth at the first grade, and particularly for those youth that are born to teenage unwed mothers who, as we've identified, many of which have deficient barriers themselves. We need to get to them just after they're born to make a difference in their lives. Now, to do that, when you talk about that kind of collaboration, it means that you've got a lot of incompatible people and organizations coming together. If we talk about prevention rather than remediation, immediately all of the remedial providers are going to be threatened because our goal is to put them out of business. So there's political issues, there's turf issues, there's interpersonal issues that are overwhelming. But in a community like Portland, Oregon, there's still the opportunity for people to put their personal issues aside, their political issues aside, and say, yes, the at-risk youth problem is severe in our community. It could make us long-term the Appalachia of the future, and we can do something about it, and we will do something about it, and that's what's happening. That's why I think it'll work.
Would also like to remind members to please use the microphone for oral questions. One of the neatest things about City Club is listening to people ask questions, and now that we have the new procedure, we seem to be getting away from that. A question from the floor. Vern, what is the future of federal, state, and local funding for this program? If any shortfall or cut occurs, how will you prioritize the local cuts?
We're living in an environment of cuts, so we just assume that that's going to happen. One of the things that we did with the Portland Private Industry Council early on is we had a $5 million budget, and we said right up front, that before we even opened our doors, that we need to leverage our resources. And we did. We leveraged them up about $4 million. And part of that $4 million was in large part the mayor's contribution of $700,000, $800,000 from city coffers to combine those programs and make them work. The school district is not reflected their funding in our program. Our current summer program, for example, is at about $2 million. But if we took the in-kind services and the support that we've received from Grant on the partnership project and all of the other school personnel, it would be substantially higher than that. The priority is, as I mentioned, to move to prevention. So as funding is cut, it will be cut in remediation. I don't know how we're going to deal with 750,000 illiterates in the federal penitentiaries. I don't know how we're going to deal with the $6.6 billion it takes to keep illiterate mothers supported. But I do know how we can deal with a young person with barriers. And if we bring social services and juvenile justice and education and the private sector and all of these people together, and we start dealing with that youngster as early as we can make contact, if you will become mentors and give them a role model, if some of you will help them in their lives as they progress, we can make a change for them. So I would say that the priority would be for prevention rather than remediation, and that we expect that the funding will continue to erode.
Question from the floor.
I'm Don Sterling, a member. This week's crisis has been the reported shortage of summer farm labor. Is there any part that your program can play in helping with that situation?
I don't believe so, and the reason I say that is that we're trying to develop systemic change. We want upward mobile employment to take people out of poverty, to make them a part of the system. The employment that the shortfall in the picking situation that's happening right now is as much a function of the early crop harvest as it is the immigration laws that we're currently mending. And I'm not sure that we could do very much in the process because we don't access the youth until they come out of school. I think if this is going to be a long-term problem rather than a one-crop problem, then it's up to the private sector, I think, to find solutions in that process.
Go ahead.
Barbara Clark, City Club member. Vern, it seems to me in a lot of ways we Americans are an anti-child society, and it shows up in our tax law, it shows up in the low pay that we have for people who work with young people. If our youth is our greatest resource, why do you suppose we act as though it's our greatest liability?
I wish I had the answer to that. I can only reflect upon that from a personal point of view. And my personal point of view is that a human being that doesn't have the experience of love and care, doesn't have an opportunity and hope, is going to fall out of the system. And since our traditional institutions, our church and family institutions, have changed so dramatically over the last 30 years, so that we have youth that are unattended, that are unloved, it's going to be hard for our society to overcome that. And for us to reach the youth at an early age, those of us who place the sharing and caring side of humanity above the aggressive competitive side as the thread that keeps us from coming unglued as a American democracy, for the institutions that we hold sacred in this society, that has to happen. So we have to find other ways, and that's why I asked those questions at the end. Can we teach people to love if they don't get it in the traditional setting?
I appreciate your thoughtful answer.
Thank you.
Margaret Strawn, City Club member.
Hello,
and yes,
Margaret.
I cut
Good to
my
see you,
hair. Given that the federal dollars can only be used down to the age of 15, and generally speaking, the school district's dollars can only be used for school-age children, and then add to that the area that is most important to teach these children to be loving and to love and to break that whole abuse system and illiteracy system, what are some of the options that you see that the state may have to fund better programs for preschool children? And I'm talking now even still in the womb, literally. The uterus, the baby in the uterus that's not getting the right care, the baby after that. Frequently, by the time they get to their first program at 3, there's been so much damage done that we cannot even remediate that. Do you have any ideas about funding mechanisms to treat this group of people?
I would just say, Margaret, it's nice to see you. And Margaret was my boss in the early going of the transition from CETA to JTPA. I want to tell you, she's a tough, tough boss, but a nice boss. And we enjoyed the time that she was providing leadership and support in terms of formulating the program that's here. Much of it has to do with her performance and her ability to lead that process. But direct answer, we do have some programs that are currently in place that are looking at the issue of dealing with that teenage pregnant mother, potential mother, and getting into a prevention with the baby, with prenatal care and following that child in school. Now, the question that Margaret asked is, how are you going to fund it? And I think one of the nice things that's happening in the state of Oregon is the Governor's Youth Initiative and the movement of the Job Training Partnership Act into economic development, and the focus that people are having on the importance of having those children turn out to be successful participants. The funding mechanism has always been focused again on remediation, and that's where most of the dollars were spent. It's beginning to change. We're beginning to see some support in moving it to lower ages. And one of the ways that we can do that we can cause what Margaret is saying to happen, is if we can take new dollars, new resources, like unsubsidized jobs from the private sector, and use those on the older people that we're remediating, we can take the remedial dollars that we would have to spend and shift them down into prevention at the womb and following. So I would see that as a significant opportunity for the system to make that shift.
Also, I wouldn't mind putting something on the ballot and asking you to chair the committee.
Thank you, Margaret.
I'd like to follow up the last two. Given the federal spending priorities that we have faced in this society currently, what shifts in these priorities would the Leaders Roundtable recommend, if any, to begin accomplishing our national goals for youth? It seems business leadership will be needed if any change is to occur.
That's a timely question, because I was at a conference at the University of Washington about 2 weeks ago that was focused on education and the economy from a regional perspective. And well, when I came there, I thought I would be with a group of peers, and I found myself with a group of educators. And the dialogue was very interesting and very stimulating. One of the things that has come through this process that has been so severe, and it really is the foundation of the Boston Compact, is that the private sector was so irate and so frustrated with education that all the acrimony and all the confrontation that took place prevented them from doing anything in a proactive, positive way. So what happened is the private sector stepped up to the Boston schools and said, if you will improve your dropout rate, if you will improve the number of children graduating, if you'll improve your SAT scores, if you'll do these things, we'll give you money. We'll give you scholarships, we'll give you support services, and so on. And that's fundamentally the Boston Compact. But what's that do long term? It doesn't do anything long term, because where's the preventative side of that? What that generally does is cause people to react to solving the problem, so you take the kids that are easiest to improve, and you do that, and you get your money, and the prevention still isn't happening. So I go back again to the issue of prevention and the fact that the system that we're currently putting in place has the opportunity to make that happen. One thing that has to take place, of course, is that we have to have collaboration. And the biggest problem across the country in almost every city is getting the private sector to sit down with education and other components of the public sector and not attack, but become part of the problem-solving process. And our private sector community here is outstanding in that regard. In fact, it was private sector leadership that brought this private-public partnership together. So the key is business and the private sector is going to have to focus on the at-risk issue as being the most paramount concern, and not the other individual issues, the other political issues that they want to focus on. And the only way it's going to happen is when, as I mentioned before, you took these work groups, there were private sector people and public sector people, and they all sat down together and they said, we're not going to fight over what the issue is, we're going to solve the problem. And if you can move to problem solving away from blaming, well, I think that's the most fundamental thing we have in teaching communication skills, is you're not going to send a blaming message to somebody, because you're not going to solve the problem. You've got to get to the issue of solving the problem, and that's what's happened. And so what we're trying to say, and the Department of Labor is trying to say, is here's a model of collaboration that's working. It's working because people have focused on solving the at-risk youth problem.
From the floor.
Hi, I'm Duncan Campbell, member of the City Club. You mentioned prevention, which I fully support, but on the other hand,
I beg your pardon? Yeah.
you mentioned prevention a number of times, which I fully support, but don't you have kind of an inherent contradiction here in the sense of talking about loving and caring parents and talking about an aggressive competitive system? Aren't the children you're talking about basically the losers in such a system? So what you're doing is treating symptoms rather than causes?
Symptoms rather than causes. You might explain that a little more.
Well, you're trying to change the behavior of children down the road, say
Yes.
from 11 years age to 18. And you've heard from a number of the questions that a lot of impact is being made as early as age 3, 4, and 5. What you're doing is dealing with the problem and the symptoms when you have to look at the causes. And specifically, if these children are in an aggressive, competitive environment, aren't they really suffering the consequences of that, and they're the losers?
Well, that's what's happened to many of them, yes. The aggressive, competitive environment is not going to go away. Our system is based on competition. But there has to be a balancing in that process. And that balancing has to take place across our country, that there's a sharing and caring side of humanity as well. What happens if you don't provide the sharing and caring model, which is normally provided in history of our country by the church and by the family and by the extended family and other closely associated institutions, is that these youth don't have that opportunity. So when they enter the system, they're either entering to survive on the street in a case of poverty, and they entered the school system, they're competing for grades, they're competing on athletic teams. Now we even have kids competing on athletic teams when they can, they have to move the plate and the pitcher's mound so close because they can't throw it that far. We got them down there competing, and that you got to win at all costs. That kind of situation is very detrimental, and not to say that it's bad if it's set alone. It's got to have the offering side. We say in this country that we are brothers and sisters keepers. And if you don't have an experience that shows that we are our brothers and sisters keepers, then it's hardly any way that the sharing and caring side can impact. So if we can't, as you've identified, do anything but treat the symptoms, if we can't get a model besides the family model that we can't change fast to accommodate this problem, because what's happening here is that the families that are together, what we would call the traditional families that exist now, are having less and less children. The children that are being brought to this world now are basically coming from that 10%, that lowest 10% of the population. And yes, unless we can elevate their standard of living, unless we can really deal with the root issues of providing people to have responsibility for children when they're born, and all of those fundamental things, then we are only dealing with some of the results rather than the real causes. But if we do know if we can find a youth at an early time and bring a preventative model to them, we can overcome some of those issues. The issues you're talking about are issues that have to be a core change in some of the basic attitudes in our country.
Just food for thought, and that is the idea that aggressive competitiveness will always be with us. I don't think that's necessarily true, and then over time, we may be able to change that so that we can balance these different forces.
I guess, I say that in the perspective of my lifetime and my son's lifetime.
I agree.
Yeah.
I have several excellent written questions up here. Vern, are there any corporations adopting schools to encourage graduation with, say, guaranteed scholarships? And related to that, how are you working with the schools specifically? All of the districts in the region or just the Portland district?
The Portland Leaders Roundtable is focused primarily on Portland schools. And since the Private Industry Council now is the two counties as well as the city of Portland, we may want to use the same kind of model not only in other parts of the counties but also in the state. And the Governor's Youth Retention Initiative has focused on some of the things that are currently being done out of the Roundtable program to export them to other areas of our state, as the Department of Labor is attempting to do for other parts of the country. What was the other part of that question?
Did you mention the possible, quote, adoption of individuals by corporations?
Oh, yes.
scholarships.
Yes, in fact, that's a real important...
schools, excuse me.
Yes, that's really important because we had a model for that process where we wanted to take children who had the capability of going to school that were in the barrier category and provide for them an opportunity to go to school with a scholarship and a mentor. And Portland, as a result, as I mentioned earlier, of our leveraging up our resources, went to a lot of private and public foundations to get additional monies. And so we made an application for a grant that would combine Portland State and the Portland Private Industry Council and the school district in a effort with the Business Youth Exchange and the others to develop a scholarship mentor program at Portland State. And we were turned down because Portland was getting too much extra money and they needed to spread it around the country. We thought the situation was so important that we funded it ourselves. I think Portland State and the Private Industry Council, I'm not sure whether the school district has some money in that, but we funded that out of our own local resources, and it's working well. And of course, the more volunteer companies and or individuals that can offer those scholarships, the more resources we have to go down to the preventative model.
A question from the floor.
Ned?
Ned Look, member. Vern, I'd like to be presumptuous enough to elaborate, if I may, on your answer to Barbara Clark as to if our youth is such a valuable resource, why don't we take better care of it? Let me suggest that when we were agricultural and a rural society, our families and all of its members were interdependent on each other. Our young were needed to till the fields, to milk the cows, and our daughters were needed to help sew and cook and take care of the house. And that made us very interdependent on each other and was the very root of love within our families. Today, we've become an urban industrial society, and our children have gone from being an economic necessity to an economic liability. And when things are a liability, you don't have the same love for them as you do when you need them.
I think my father could have taken the same attitude about me. We were very poor people, but I didn't have that experience in my case. I was taught that the only way I was going to get to heaven was to be clean and to work hard. And I was also taught that no matter how poor you were or what the circumstances were in this industrial age, that there was always somebody that was going to love me. And I'm sure what you say is that a lot of that has happened in our society, but it can all be retracted, it can all be recovered if we don't stand by and let it happen.
Julie Sterling, a member of the City Club. We know that many young people are making major income as drug dealers and prostitutes. What is the Roundtable doing to lure them away from these insidious industries?
I don't know that we're luring them away. Drugs and prostitution are definitely a problem with youth at risk. No question about that. What we're trying to do is prevent the conditions that cause them to turn to drugs and to prostitution. And that's what the Roundtable is focused on. We understand that we cannot and go out and remediate teenage prostitutes and heavy drug users. But we can try and bring the people who do remediate those two groups of people, juvenile justice and health services, and have them put on the education systems and do all the kinds of things we can do in a preventative model, or if we have somebody who looks like they might turn out to have that kind of behavior, head them off early. And that's where we're focused, as at stopping them from becoming that way.
Our time is up. I'd like to thank all of you for your excellent questions. Sorry we couldn't get to all of the wonderful written ones that were submitted. And thank you, Vern, for an excellent presentation. We are adjourned.